Is it time for a name shift? If you don't know what that means, then join me, your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, on the Dismantling Doctrine podcast. Formerly known as the Mind Shift podcast, it's time for a change. And if you're someone who's looking to rebuild their life after dismantling whatever doctrine may have controlled you, then this show is for you. I'm really glad to be talking today with Marissa Hackett. She is the survivor of a cult, and I'm really excited to get into this story, how you got in, how you got out. So welcome, Marissa, to the Dismantling Doctrine podcast.
Thank you, Clint. It's really nice to meet you. I'm really excited to just chat with you about my experience and share what I've been through and where I am now and all of the above.
It sounds like an absolutely unbelievable story. And then as we said before we hit record, we're kind of where we would have been neighbors, sort of. I grew up in the Seattle, Washington area. It sounds like that's kind of where you're from now. Did you grow up there, or were you always from there, or did you end up, because of this cult, end up there?
I'm actually a Seattle transplant. I moved to Seattle actually just in the fall of 2019, right before things shut down in the world. I was living in southwestern Montana before that, actually. I was there for almost 7 years. But so I've lived all over in my adult life, but I was born in Los Angeles, California, in the late 70s, and I've spent a lot of my time on the West Coast. But I'm pretty settled in Seattle currently. Yeah.
You like Seattle? There's a lot of rain, but it is a great place to live. I always love going back and visiting family and friends and all that. It's been about 5 or 6 years since I've been there, but it's changed so much since I left. I mean, it's just shocking how it's just exploding, isn't it?
Yeah, I love Seattle for the access to the outdoors that I can get on a hiking trail within 30 minutes, or all of the green space within the city is a huge appeal to me. There's also a lot of like-minded folks for me that live here, so I definitely have my community of folks that I feel really at home with here in Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we lived in Portland for a long time after we left Seattle, and it's got a similar vibe, doesn't it? It's a very liberal city, very eclectic city, very diverse city. Portland and Seattle are very similar, I think, in that regard. It's a good place to be if you are a little bit open-minded. There are fundamentalists there, though. You can't.
Yeah, we've definitely. Yeah, I mean, having spent a lot of my time in Oregon, I don't feel quite the same about Portland as I do Seattle. Portland, both cities have their challenges in regards to gentrification, and when you speak of diversity, there isn't a uplifting of the historical communities that have made, especially here in Seattle, the Black communities have been gentrified to a degree that's just immoral. So that's a whole nother conversation. But so I mean, as a therapist in training, I hold a lot of truths at once. So I love Seattle, but there's a lot of things that break my heart about living here that I witness that I just have to name. But I do have a really lovely life here, and I love living here. Yeah.
It's true, isn't it? You have to have that perspective, because I've been over here in the UK for about coming up on 18, 19 years, and it's no utopia, is it? Everywhere you go, there's good things about it, bad things about it, things that you wish you could change. But yeah, overall, if you have a good quality of life, that's hugely important, especially if you come out of religion. This is something I'm coming out as an ex-evangelical. I was a pastor, I was a Bible college teacher, I spent all my adult life in education, ministry, teaching, and all the rest of it. And now it's like, oh, I get to reinvent myself. Is that kind of what you feel you're doing? I mean, we need to get into the story, but you said you're a therapist in training. Is that a new profession you're investigating?
Yeah, well, I will say, just to speak to that point, my finding community here in Seattle, I live here with my husband, my partner, and we have a really special group of friends and family here in the area. So that makes the whole difference of why I love this community. We have family all along the West Coast here, all along the I-5 corridor that we get to spend time with, and friends that I've known since my time in Southern Oregon when I was living within a fundamentalist cult. So yeah, I guess I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I just wanted to name that how much we value community, and how much anywhere I live, it's finding folks that you have community with is really special. And I definitely, everywhere I've lived, just to kind of speak to what you're talking about, I have found, because like I said, I was living in Montana before Seattle. I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I've lived in Santa Cruz, California, Amherst, Massachusetts. So to name a few places, I have, because of my upbringing, I know how to find community, or I strive to find community wherever I live, because it's so important to not feel isolated when you feel like when you're existing. So yeah, that's the kind of a deeper, but that's definitely how I look at it. Because of my upbringing, I definitely strive and know how to find community and know the importance of finding community wherever I live.
It is hugely important. It is hugely important. And of course, as we know, religions, cults, that's just what they specialize in, isn't it? They give this sense of community, and your, love bombing and all the classic tactics of cults and religious groups. And they do make you feel so welcome, and it feels so good to be loved and accepted and everything else. It's only later that you get into the teachings and the doctrines and all that. That's when you can get into trouble, isn't it?
Yes. And just to kind of lead into my story, I was just speaking to one of my mother's first cousins yesterday, and she referenced having read some of my blog that I have out on Substack about my upbringing, and she shared with me, your mother and I were very close. My mother passed away in 2016. Your mother and I were very close, but your move to Southern Oregon, she never mentioned the group affiliation that you were with. She never mentioned Roy Masters or the Foundation of Human Understanding as a motivation as to why we moved. And it just speaks to my mom found community within the Foundation of Human Understanding, and it was something that where she found friends, and just to speak to your point, I think she felt very welcomed and seen in the community, but there was a hidden component to it as well. There were some components that she couldn't even tell her first cousin about.
Mm-hmm. There always is when you dig a little bit deeper. Well, let's get into the story. Were you born into this group then? I think you kind of alluded to that. You didn't join it later on in life. You were born into it. So how did you end up getting, maybe it's your parents, isn't it, who were into it, and then you were born into it. How did this all begin? Let's go back to the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. I am among the group that was born into high mind control, a cult environment. And so I was born in 1979. And before I was born, my mom started listening to Roy Masters, who was a AM radio talk show host that was all across the U.S. My mom was a talk show junkie, but she was also a seeker, I think, looking for self-help type folks to enter her life. And Roy offered a lot of tough love and direct feedback about life. And my mom was a young mother, a young wife in LA, and Roy's headquarters was in Southern California. So he started offering in-person sessions as from what I understand. And my mother started attending what they called meetings. And this is, again, before I was born, but I hear stories from my older brothers. I'm one of 6 kids. There were 3 kiddos that were born before me. So my 3 older brothers have a little more memories of it in the earlier stages. But so my mom and dad as well started going to different groups affiliated with Roy's Foundation of Human Understanding in Southern California. And when I first became aware of it as a child was that my brothers and I were all homeschooled in California in Los Angeles. And we were in West Los Angeles, the only kiddos in our neighborhood that weren't going to public school. And we were instead attending different homeschool groups and gatherings with, later I learned, were just different families affiliated with the Foundation of Human Understanding. The story that was always fed to or told to my siblings and I is that public school was too immoral. We would get brainwashed into believing things that our family wasn't aligned with, things of that nature. I, as a child, desperately wanted to go to school, so it was always a big conflict for me, not being in formal education even once I became aware. So age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the story goes at age 11, my family and I, well, actually, let me skip back. In 1980-81, Roy Masters purchased a large ranch in Southern Oregon called Tall Timber Ranch. At that point, he started encouraging all the followers to leave Southern Oregon to move to, or excuse me, leave Southern California to move to Southern Oregon, near a town called Grants Pass, Oregon. And one of my earliest vacations that I remember was going to visit the ranch and staying with strangers there that had already moved from different parts of the country. And then that was really our every summer vacation, was driving up to Grants Pass to visit until we moved.
So the classic cult compound sort of thing. It sounds like it. And I've heard of stories where it's almost like a test of loyalty, isn't for the followers. Let's move the whole group from across country or across the state and see how many, are standing at the end of the whole thing. I have a friend who was at a high control sort of fundamentalist church in Southern California. And one day the leader came in and announced, we're all moving to Portland. And that's where I met her when I was a pastor in Portland. It's a classic type thing, isn't it? All the true followers will come with me. The rest of you, this proves that you weren't true followers or true believers.
Yeah, the foundation had a national magazine that was published that went to all the followers, and I recently found some at my father's home in Grants Pass. He still lives there, and there were home advertisements in the back of the magazine for homes in Grants Pass. So my parents, so it was the classic move, and we were a little bit later because my dad had a really well-established job in Southern California. We owned a home. We had lived around all of our family and friends. Even though we weren't homeschooled, my siblings and I were involved in a lot of activities and pretty happy life in Southern California, despite being a little unique because we were still following a lot of the tenets of the foundation. But we still had our family, which I think gave us some checks and balances that I don't know if they knew fully what was going on, but they were around. And my parents, I don't think, were speaking as openly until my father ended up retiring early. And that led to my mom having and motivating our family to move to Grants Pass in 91. So where Roy moved the foundation in, I think, the early 80s, and we had visited the ranch and all of that. But then in 91, as soon as our family circumstances changed, within 6 months, we're moving up there. My dad and I was 11, and I had two older brothers that stayed in Southern California, and then there were 3 of us siblings that moved with my parents. And like, even talking about it makes my stomach just really sad, because it was absolutely one of the most dramatic days of my life. We just started moving. We're like the place. I was literally born in the home that I grew up in LA. Home births were a big part of the environment or the expectation for the foundation. So I was born in the home my parents bought before I came along, and we were really well established in the neighborhood. And then we all of a sudden were up and moving to Grants Pass, Oregon.
Of all places. And it split the family, really, it sounds like, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, yeah.
Well, going back to Roy Masters, you mentioned he was a talk show host. I guess it would have been like early 70s when he kind of was hitting his high points. What was his basic sort of doctrine or theology? Because you mentioned he was like a self-help guy. Was there a religious component to it? Or was it strictly like a self-help cult, like a Nexium type thing, or one of those?
There was a religious component, and I don't know how it started. I mean, when I go back and listen to some of the earlier recordings, but what I was born into and grew into there was definitely a Judeo-Christian religious component to it. That was that was part of the teachings, but there were some new age components as well, because there was hypnosis was a component. So there was a lot of controversy among those that were more traditional Christians, that also where Roy had the expectation that folks would engage in meditation and hypnosis sessions as well. But the school that I attended upon moving to Grants Pass in 91, Roy and his donors built a brand new K-12 school for followers to attend in Grants Pass, which was how my family couched it too. I don't actually know. I keep hearing different stories. I think my parents told family members and friends in California different stories about why we were moving. One was my older brothers were getting into gang activity. One was there was a new school, private school that they wanted us to attend. One was they wanted to get more into nature. I think all were true, but the real, motivation was the foundation headquarters moved there. So the only school that I ever knew and attended was a school in Grants Pass built and funded by Roy and the followers from 6th through 12th grade. So the formal schooling I knew and started was there. So personally, I was pretty excited to not just be homeschooled, under homeschooled, non-homeschooled. It was really not very formal.
Traditional.
Yeah, in Southern California, the homeschooling was not very formal, and it was not, I feel like it wasn't progressing educationally. So once we moved to Grants Pass, the school was there, but it was the Roy school. I mean, we knew, and everyone there were families that had moved from all over the U.S. And for those that are watching this, I'm a Black American woman, and my family is a Black family. And there were several Black families that moved to small town Oregon to follow Roy. It was just the unique draw of Roy. At least in Southern California, I know part of that for Black families was that Roy had a fathers group targeted towards Black fathers, which is just, so I think that was a part of my parents' involvement. So it was just a unique school in that there were 12 kids that graduated in my high school graduating class, and there were 3 of us kids that were Black kids, and then there were kids that were of other different ethnicities. So it was like a small United Nations that came together following Roy, which just created lots of confusion, and especially being in Southern Oregon, which is a renownedly racist community.
Yes, I was going to say, it's white bread central, man. You guys must have stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
A place like Grants Pass, I've been through there, I've been down in, because I lived in Portland for years, so we would drive south, visiting friends and all that. But yeah, it's a whole different world out there. Once you get outside of the Portland area, it gets really rural. It's very beautiful. It is stunningly beautiful. I will give it that. It's absolutely gorgeous countryside. But the people there can be a bit sort of regressed in their views on race and religion. Maybe they're like Christian nationalists. I don't know. But was this school, was it on the compound as well? Was it all sealed in, or was it actually in the town of Grants Pass?
Oh, no, the town was right in Grants Pass, downtown
right.
Grants Pass. So we were kind of known as the cult kids, the different kids. You go to that school.
Right.
School. Definitely. In the years I was there, it was, we were known. And then there was a point where, because it started doing so well and that it was a smaller school, smaller classrooms, some of the public school kids' parents would start to send their kiddos to our school just because of the reputation for it being a conservative Christian school where kids stayed out of trouble, which for the most part we did. We were pretty good kids.
Good kids.
Yeah, I mean, at least my group of friends were, but there was a lot of harm that was also done in that environment in regards to the teachings we had, because it was a right-wing fundamentalist Christian environment that, a lot of what drew me to your conversations, Clint, or how you sort of draw the through lines between some of that and what we're seeing with like Trumpism and the current political climate. So when I reflect on what I was learning in regards to racism, sexism, misogyny in my high school years, essentially what I see among the most extreme faction of the Republican Party in the U.S. today. So, I mean, I grew up so the expectation among the group as I aged, among my parents anyway, were to be right-wing fundamentalist. And my mom happened to be quite a bit of an activist, so I saw her morph from following Roy and the foundation and jump into the Tea Party and Fox News and Trump up, and she passed this summer before Trump was elected, but she would have been right there and there. So it was, and most folks that I grew up with, a lot of folks that I grew up with followed that path of thinking and still align with that. And I do believe it was our upbringing in the foundation and Roy and just that schooling and that those beliefs that kind of led to a lot of that faction we see today in the Trumpism.
Would you say that was his aim then? It was like a hybrid cult, though, in a way. You mentioned there's some New Age stuff thrown in there, Christian fundamentalism, maybe this sort of dominionist piece, the Christian nationalist piece. It wasn't just a strict Bible cult. It sounds like it had a lot of different influences to it.
It did, Clint. And one of the other components, he looked at media. Roy had a pop radio production company in Southern Oregon to where like Sean Hannity was an early sort of follower. So there's a lot of ties to sort of right-wing media that Roy continued. And even to this day, Roy's offspring continue to have talk radio shows sharing similar sentiments that their father did in regards to being deep into the right-wing political arena. So there was definitely an attempt to influence like Grants Pass politically, and that's where my mom sort of jumped on that. She was a political activist in Grants Pass that definitely was motivated, I believe, from her involvement with Roy and the foundation for sure.
After the break, we're going to come back with part 2 of this conversation with Marissa Hackett, who, of course, survived and got out of Roy Master's Foundation of Human Understanding cult down in Southern Oregon. We're going to talk about what was life like growing up in the cult. How did Marissa get out, and what is she doing now in terms of her own recovery and helping those who have gotten out of high control religious groups like the one she was a part of for so many years. I just wanted to mention what's coming up here in the next few episodes on the Dismantling Doctrine podcast. We've got a conversation coming up with Keith Giles, who has a new book that's just come out a few months back, and it is called The Quantum Sayings of Jesus, Decoding the Lost Gospel of Thomas. Now, Keith and I had just a fantastic, really wide-ranging discussion on a whole bunch of things, including his new book, but he's a very, I guess you could say, a progressive Christian, just an absolutely fascinating guy to talk to. I met him through Anna and Carrie Joe of the Heretical Hippies, and then I've got a couple of other conversations in the pipeline. I caught up with my good friend Dean Crosets, who was on the show a few years ago, just finding out what's happening with his life. And then I talked to another guy named Ryan George, who's kind of another progressive Christian, kind of in the vein of Keith Giles. So I think that's going to be a fascinating one for you to listen to. And then in the month of July, we're going to come out with an episode with Tia Levings, and she's the one who, of course, had a viral video on TikTok talking about the Fundy baby voice, and she came out of the Bill Gothard cult, the same kind of background that I did. If you've seen the Amazon Prime series Shiny Happy People, you'll know this is all about the Duggars, the Bill Gothard Institute and Basic Life Principles cult, and all the religious trauma syndrome and all the stuff that goes along with that. So this is something that Tia is absolutely intimately familiar with. She's got a new book coming out in July, so that's going to drop sometime around when her book comes out as well. The other thing, speaking of books, my book is so close. I keep saying this, I know, but me and Tim Sledge, we've been working on this really, really hard, going through a lot of the edits, chapter by chapter. I've had to rewrite a couple of chapters, some brand new stuff on the end of the book, but it's going to make it for a better book. So I don't want to put it out until it's absolutely ready, and we're both 100% proud that it's going to be an absolute page turner, which I think it is. So this book is coming out very soon, hopefully sometime this summer. So I will be promoting that as well. I'll probably be reading the preface chapter from the book so you can get an idea of what it's about. But yes, it's finally going to be coming out hopefully within the next few months, so I will keep you updated about that. All right, let's get on back into the second half of this conversation with Marissa Hackett as she continues to talk about how she survived Roy Master's Foundation of Human Understanding cult. Are we talking sort of like a Rush Limbaugh type of vibe?
Yeah, 100%.
Did you get into conspiracy theories as well, or was it fundamentalist right-wing conservative stuff?
I mean, there was, Rush was the other. So I grew up having Roy and Rush in the radio in my household. So it was definitely, both were big parts of what I heard growing up. So yeah, the conspiracy theories a part of, I mean, when my family moved to Southern Oregon, I was very upset. I did not speak to my parents for several months, as the story goes.
You didn't want to
get my system. I had just hit puberty. I was at friends, and I did not want to leave my family. So I just shut myself in my room and didn't talk to them for months. But they would, try to talk about why they moved there. And one of the reasons was, well, the world might be ending soon. So this is a place that's going to protect us. The mountains of Southern Oregon are going to protect us from, the doom and gloom that's going to happen. So we were definitely, so the apocalypse was coming. We were definitely preppers. We had a garage full of dried foods that everyone that I knew did. So it was a combination of all the things, just like you said. I definitely,
all in there.
So when I'm familiar with it all. So a lot of these would it's just the bits and pieces so Y2K came, and I was out of my parents' home at that point, but I think I was in college. Yeah, I was in college at that point, but that was a big time in my family's lives. We were prepared. My parents were preparing for the world to end and for things to all shut down. So, I still see food prepping in my family's garage to this day. So definitely a lot of that was a component. So a lot of paranoia. So definitely.
But it doesn't sound like it was like a closed compound, does it? You were living in the town? Because,
yeah. So
how high control was it? Because you can go to the extreme, your FLDS, your fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, or even worse groups where they're literally like a barbed wire compound where you cannot physically escape. I talked to someone who was one of his wives, Warren Jeff's wife. She was like his 65th wife, and she literally escaped from the cult and ran away, So it doesn't sound like it was that kind of an environment, does it?
No. And just speaking of that, my husband grew up in a fundamentalist LDS cult. So I definitely, so we call the one that I grew up in we met in high school, Cult Light, the foundation of human understanding. And Roy Masters is definitely Cult Light compared to what you're speaking of exactly. And I know that well. My sister-in-law wrote a book about her experience and part of called The Sound of Gravel, where they grew up in parts of Mexico as a part of a polygamous community. So I know that well. My husband happened to have grown up in that. So definitely what I experienced and survived is nothing. And even my personal experience, because of my own just capacity to stay safe within my household. And I am lucky and grateful that I can speak about what I witnessed and not having had as much harm as some other folks that even in my cult light experience. But in regards to what was hidden were what happened at the ranch, which was about an hour outside of Grants Pass. That's where we would go for events and activities, and the kids would play and the parents would go into sessions and rooms. And I don't know, I never knew what was happening, but that's where, so we would come into town and function as we have this normal school and we are all living in town and we own businesses, but then we'd go out to the ranch and there would be sessions that the parents were involved in. And what my friends and I that I grew up with talk about, the youth, the kiddos weren't asked directly to participate in the hypnosis sessions or the meditation sessions. Our experience was more just the teachings we had, the expectations of purity and morality, as I think how we were affected the most in regards to the practices that our parents were involved with. And, we weren't restricted on a compound. I think our teachings and our life lessons, or the lack thereof, is what restricted a lot of us in the end. That's what screwed us up more.
Yeah.
The unlearning that we had to do about just gender roles. And that's just one that comes to mind. And just,
oh, yeah. Well, you said, the purity culture, that affects everything in terms of sexuality, relationships, marriages, family. I grew up in the evangelical purity culture, and it really messed me up. Even to this day, I've still got hanging on issues, Well, what would the sort of daily program of this cult look like? Because it sounded like, okay, it wasn't a high control group, but something you said it was cult light, but something that Dr. Stephen Hassan says, it's an influence continuum. Certain groups have more control, more influence, others have less, but that doesn't mean that we didn't receive some damage. Someone said it's like a dosage, going to the doctor and getting an x-ray. It makes sense, doesn't it? We need a little bit to x-ray our teeth or a broken bone. But if we get too much, it can do serious damage and you have more to recover from. So would you feel like it's on that sort of continuum somewhere? Obviously, other groups were maybe far worse, but this wasn't exactly great.
Yeah, I think what it did, I think the isolation was what was one of the most challenging components. A lot of us families moved away from our immediate families and ended up in this small freaking town in the middle of nowhere. So Christmases, holidays, birthdays were all expected to be with the group. So even though we were living really independently, but the control was still there because the only people I knew or grew up with, like interacting with public school kids was considered, shameful. You might have premarital sex if you hang out with public school kids, or, it changed. A lot of families moved there and realized it was not what they were expecting. So I'll just say, like, the isolation was traumatizing for a lot of families. And I think it was for my mom too. She left my 17 and 19-year-old brothers in California. I mean, I know because we ended up being very close, I know it depressed her, and she shared that with me eventually. But anyway, so I think, it was definitely just like this, because you felt like you were free and kind of living on, but we weren't. It was a lot of isolation. I mean, my best friends to this day are people I went to high school with. A lot of them are. I'm married to someone I met in that school because truly that upbringing was but we also diverted from that way of thinking, so that helps, us connect. And my friends that I'm friends with now, we all sort of in high school started to go, whoa, this is not aligning with our moral compasses. I don't hate gay people. I don't. If there's a reason for someone to terminate a pregnancy, I'm going to support that. I don't. Interracial relationships aren't bad, or So there were just teachings as some of us started looking at college, and higher education isn't the devil. I'm not going to go get brainwashed by going to college. Things like that. It's okay to get educated. So those are, I'm speaking to some of the lessons that we heard. I was shamed for wanting to go to Ashland, Oregon to college. That's where I ended up going. I stayed close to home, but I
wasn't even that far away.
No. And I had that fear. Like, I thought, okay, I'm going to stay close to home. I'm going to go to the hippy dippy Ashland because that's the closest place where I can still sort of be who I feel like I'm more authentically meant to be. And it wasn't, a conservative Christian gal. It just wasn't, it didn't align with my gut and my soul and who I was. When I started seeing like the hatefulness, especially towards LGBTQ folks, it just didn't align with me. I thought about if I knew anyone that was openly gay in my high school, they would have been not accepted, ridiculed,
shunned. Yeah.
It was just shunned. There was no space for it. No space for it.
So is that how you got out in the end? You went to college, and it sounded like it exposed you to a whole new world out there. It's pretty shocking, isn't it, when you're assaulted with these different beliefs and worldviews, really. You think, wait a minute, what was I raised to believe? What the hell's going on here?
Well, the thing that happened to me is because I was kind of bookend with these beliefs, because I was born in LA and moved a little bit later than a lot of some folks that I met in Grants Pass. I had already been exposed to California life. I was going to Santa Monica Beach and malls, and I had queer neighbors, and it definitely, like, once I got to the end of high school, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get back to who I was already saw myself becoming in California after this pit stop.
That idea, it's your authentic identity, isn't it? That was the real Marissa.
Yes. And but Clint, I'll tell you, that experience gave me a particular insight into humans and a level of empathy and compassion that I don't know how else I could have gained it. I mean, folks, and so those of us that were born into this, those of us that didn't learn anything else. So I understand why folks are aligned with Trumpism. I mean, I do. I could very well have been that person. I could be Candace Owens. I could be Clarence Thomas. I mean,
be the next Marjorie Taylor Greene out there.
I mean, I could have been. And I know people, during certain heightened political times, it's obvious, and on social media, it's obvious those of us that grew up in the foundation went one path, and some of us went another. Yeah, so definitely for me, just reflecting back, it was that isolation, the fact that, my parents moved away from our family and friends, and so many other families did that, and they kind of gaslit us and told us well, that's not why we moved. We moved because we wanted to. And even to this day, when I talk to folks, those of us in my generation, our 30s and 40s and 50s that grew up in this, our parents, some died saying they didn't move because of Roy. And I've debated with my father, who's in his 80s, recently about the motivation of their move. So it's, so the brainwashing, whatever you want to call it, is strong and it's there. And I know we all have different stories of how we live our lives and our own realities. But for me, that environment through the foundation of Roy was harmful. It was grounded in more hate than love. And I saw it hurt more people than help more people.
Yeah, you lived through it. Well, is it still going today, the foundation? Because you mentioned Roy's offspring. So obviously he's passed away at some point. But a lot of times cults, just because the founder dies, doesn't mean the cult passes away. I mean, look at Scientology, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, there's so many groups that are still going, even though the founder's long since dead.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I follow it just as I do research for my blog, and there's definitely the ranch is still functioning. As I mentioned, two of Roy's sons still have a talk radio show. Roy and his wife Anne passed away within the last few years, and there was a live stream memorial service for them where folks spoke, and I knew several of the folks that were speaking, and the way they even spoke of Roy, of him doing no wrong, and he he was idolized, and as someone that was Roy, I mean, I don't like giving him a lot of breath, but I think he was a very mean and abusive and toxic person. What I've witnessed and what I've seen and how he spoke to people and treated people and how he was revered, it was traumatizing to watch. And that's why I think about someone like Trump, who is so toxic and harmful to community, but folks revere him as someone. So it's really triggering when I see Trump and I think about Roy, who was equally evil and toxic to community, while folks fell for a different story. And it's just, so that's partially why I speak out, for folks to listen to their guts if they do not want to follow or align themselves with something that doesn't seem right morally, even if you're being told that it is.
Well, obviously there's been a lot written and talked about the quote unquote cult of Trump, and that sounds like Roy Masters fits that sort of paradigm, doesn't it? I mean, you could go down the line, what you've just described. You have this messianic figure, this charismatic person, draws people into himself, and his teachings are amazing and wonderful, and he's got this inside line on everything. So yeah, you could see where people could revere a person like that. He fits the classic cult leader markers, doesn't he?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I've been seeing it. I discussed it with my sister-in-law, who, as I mentioned, and my husband, who grew up in a fundamentalist Mormon cult, and me with my cult light with the foundation. And we just see all these parallels and we just watch it. And it's hard to watch, but I'm grateful that we have each other to sort of process. Yeah. And conversations like this, Clint, I appreciate as well, just to sort of process, like, we see it and it's hard to unsee it once you see it. And it's just healing and helpful, and hopefully others can listen to our conversations and just heal as well, whatever, if they're seeking to.
That's it. I mean, I found the biggest piece of my healing and restoration has been the education part of it. I don't know if that resonates with you, but like you said, being able to describe the various cult tactics and then how the cult psychology was used on us to control us, to manipulate us, to get us to do what they wanted us to do or not to do, and then when you can name those things, say, okay, they did that to me, that to me, that to me, and this resulted in me feeling this way and acting this way, that disempowers it a lot. Did you find that to be the case? I mean, how did you end up? So you talked about going to university. Is that sort of the path that led you out ultimately in the end?
I mean, I think it was finding like-minded folks in high school that we could have these honest conversations. Like, do you feel that way? Same as our parents? Do you know?
I don't agree with that.
Yeah, like, I don't agree with that. I don't feel that way. So we just sort of helped support each other, honestly, as sort of, so feeling seen and acknowledged among groups of friends helped, just with the confidence that what we were seeing as not okay was not okay, so that helped, just with and for me, it took a lot of fights with my parents and conflicts with my parents, a lot of debates with my parents about what I believe is right and what they believe is right. And But in the end, I mean, what I told my mom, what I always told my mom was like, you raised me to be an independent thinker, despite I wouldn't be questioning all of this if you didn't raise me the way you raised me, is what I would,
Exactly. Yeah.
how I landed. So
This is what you get.
yeah, I was like, I always thanked her, said, thank you, Mom, for giving me critical thinking. And isn't this what you would want?
In the midst of an argument, I'm sure she wasn't thankful at that.
No.
Oh, the irony.
Oh,
That's exactly right. When you're ready to push back, you're saying, wait, I'm thinking critically here. I'm questioning the status quo. Why aren't you? Well, there's a whole discussion there, isn't there?
and she used to. I mean, her siblings tell me in the 60s, like she went from Angela Davis to loving Ronald Reagan as she started following Roy. So it's just so, it's just the power, right? It's just a power of that mind control and where you feel like you're going to have community and belonging. And I mean, as a Black woman in America, I know it's difficult to feel love and accepted in all communities of the world. So, or in all communities in the country. So I'm assuming I didn't get to have all the in-depth conversations with my mom, but I imagine she felt seen and accepted with Roy and the foundation for whatever reason. And she, decided that was going to be her refuge for whatever reason. But yeah, but for me, education, like I loved the research you're doing, talking about the pastors. I think it's in Idaho, who's just like another, like hearing you talk about him. It's just like, oh my gosh.
It's another Roy Master.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely the same. Yeah. Like I was like, I got to talk to Clint. Like he gets it. Like the research you're doing, the way you're reflecting on what's happening is really powerful. And I'm just so grateful that you're talking and doing what you're doing, because it's just, like you said, it also helps me, folks like me, to put language to what I'm seeing and what I experienced. And I think the more we can, do the research and name it and put it in writing and have these conversations, it's just the more healing will happen for sure.
Well, we're forming a community, a lot of it's online, but I remember when I first came out of Christianity as an ex-evangelical, I found support groups on social media, Facebook. They were hugely helpful. Like you were talking about earlier, finding that community, finding out that, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands, however many thousands of us that have come out of these backgrounds. And okay, it's like, I'm not alone. That's a huge thing, isn't it? What you went through is not exactly the same as what I went through, but there's a lot of commonalities. And that's what makes it, I think, very empowering, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I think as humans, like we have a lot more in common than we don't. A lot of us have had similar experience. I mean, look at us. We couldn't look any more different, but we've had we get it. Like we get what we get that experience. So I think the more you named it, and that's partially one of the motivations that why I've entered the mental health field. So if folks that are coming out of environments like we experience that need to be seen and validated in a therapeutic setting, that's definitely one of the realms that I hope to get into and work with folks that have come from maybe high mind control environments or just any sort of religious trauma and maybe want to explore a new spirituality. I mean, so it's just a whole shift, and I want to hold space for folks that might be confused or scared, or because you can lose family and friends, and I know it's not difficult. It takes a lot of bravery. So I just applaud you, and again, in having these conversations, they're really powerful.
Well, it's huge what you're doing, because as we know, religious trauma syndrome is a lot of secular therapy. They've never even heard of the term, let alone have experienced what it is. So what you're doing, I applaud what you're doing, because you'll be one of those ones that people will come to and say, okay, here's a person who gets it, like you say, who understands what I've gone through. Well, listen, we got to go. I'm thinking we've been about 45 minutes, but how can people find you on social media? What's the best way? You said you had a blog, so how can people find your work?
Sure. So, I mean, I just have a personal blog on Substack. It's called Breaking the Cycle by Marissa Hackett. I started it last year. I'm not as active on there, but I'd love for folks to check it out, because I'm going to start it back up really soon here. So you get a little insight into my life, just a little bit of background about the foundation, some personal stuff. I also have a public Instagram account, Marissa Hearts You. It's more light stuff, just a little bit photos and stuff about my life. But I'd love folks to connect with me either on Substack or Instagram. And then as I finish up my final year of my master's program in marriage and family therapy, I'll be starting my private practice in 2025. So if folks want to keep track of me, just find me on Instagram or Substack and follow my blog, and I'll be around having more of these conversations for sure.
Yeah, well, that's really good. I think too, it'd be great if you want to come in maybe in another couple of months. I'll get back a hold of you. We have a group call we do once a month. So I would love to have you come back and be the guest on that. So I'll send you some emails. We'll maybe come back around again, and then we'll build more of that community. It'd be great.
I would love that. Clint. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Really
Okay.
do.
I'll send you an email. We'll figure it out. Thank you so much, Marissa. We finally made this happen. We did bouncing around back and forth.
Yeah.
We finally made it happen. I'm so glad we met. Have a really good day, and I will see you probably again on a Zoom call.
Sounds great. I look forward to it. Take care, Clint.